Talking to Fox by David Garnett, Part 7. Narrated by Najeeb. The old woman was white with fury. She did not mind what she said, but Mr. Tubrick was not listening to her. At last he looked at her and saw that she had just begun to cry. So he went out of the room and up to bed, and lay down as he was in his clothes, utterly exhausted, and fell into a dog's sleep, starting up every now and then with horror, and then falling back with fatigue. It was late when he woke up, but cold and raw, and he felt cramped in all his limbs. As he lay, he heard again the noise which had woken him, the trotting of several horses, and the voices of men riding by the house. Mr. Tubrick jumped up and ran to the window and then looked out, and the first thing that he saw was a gentleman in a pink coat riding at a walk down the lane. At this sight, Mr. Tubrick waited no longer, but pulling on his boots in mad haste, ran out instantly, meaning to say that they must not hunt, and how his wife was escaped and they might kill her. But when he found himself outside the cottage, words failed him, and fury took possession of him, so that he could only cry out, "How dare you, you damned blackguard!" And so, with a stick in his hand, he threw himself on the gentleman in the pink coat and seized his horse's rein, and catching the gentleman by the leg was trying to throw him. But really, it is impossible to say what Mr. Trubrick intended by his behavior, or what he would have done. For the gentleman, finding himself suddenly assaulted in so unexpected a fashion by so strange a tousled and dishevelled figure, clubbed his hunting crop and dealt him a blow on the temple so that he fell insensible. Another gentleman rode up at this moment, and they were civil enough to dismount and carry Mr. Trubrick into the cottage, where they were met by old Nanny, who kept wringing her hands and told them Mr. Trubrick's wife had run away, and she was a vixen, and that was the cause that Mr. Trubrick had run out and assaulted them. The two gentlemen could not help laughing at this, and mounting their horses rode on without delay, after telling each other that Mr. Trubrick, whoever he was certainly a madman, and the old woman seemed as mad as her master. This story, however, went the rounds of the gentry in those parts and perfectly confirmed everyone in their previous opinion, namely, that Mr. Trubrick was mad, and his wife had run away from him. The part about her being a vixen was laughed at by the few that heard it, but was soon left out as immaterial to the story, and incredible in itself, though afterwards it came to be remembered and its significance to be understood. When Mr. Dubrick came to himself, it was past noon, and his head was aching so painfully that he could only call to mind in a confused way what had happened. However, he sent off Mrs. Cox's son directly on one of his horses to inquire about the hunt. At the same time, he gave orders to old Nanny that she was to put out food and water for her mistress, on the chance that she might yet be in the neighborhood. By nightfall, Simon was back with the news that the hunt had had a very long run, but had lost one fox, then drawing a covert, had chopped an old dog fox, and so ended the day's sport. This put poor Mr. Trubrick in some hopes again, and he rose at once from his bed and went out to the wood and began calling his wife, but was overcome with faintness and lay down and so passed the night in the open, from mere weakness. In the morning he got back again to the cottage, but he had taken a chill, and so had to keep his bed for 3 or 4 days after. All this time he had food put out for her every night, but though rats came to it and ate of it, there were never any prints of a fox. At last his anxiety began working another way. That is, he came to think it possible that his vixen would have gone back to Stockholm. So he had his horses harnessed in the dog cart and brought to the door and then drove over to Rylands, though he was still in a fever and with a heavy cold upon him. After that he lived always solitary, keeping away from his fellows and only seeing one man called Askew, who had been brought up a jockey at Wantage, but was grown too big for his profession. He mounted this laughing fellow on one of his horses 3 days a week, and had him follow the hunt and report to him whenever they killed, and if he could view the fox, so much the better. And then he made him describe it minutely, so he should know if it were his Sylvia, But he dared not trust himself to go himself, lest his passion should master him and he might commit a murder. Every time there was a hunt in the neighborhood, he set the gates wide open at Rylands and the house doors also, and taking his gun stood sentinel in the hope that his wife would run in if she were pressed by the hounds, and so he could save her. But only once a hunt came near, when two fox hounds that had lost the main pack strayed onto his land, and he shot them instantly and buried them afterwards himself. It was not long now to the end of season, as it were the middle of March, but living as he did at this time, Mr. Tebrick grew more and more to be a true misanthrope. He denied admittance to any that came to visit him, and rarely showed himself to his fellows, but went out chiefly in the early mornings before people were about, in the hopes of seeing his beloved folks. Indeed, it was only this hope that he would see her again that kept him alive, for he had become so careless of his own comfort in every way that he very seldom ate a proper meal, taking no more than a crust of bread with a morsel of cheese in the whole day, though sometimes he would drink half a bottle of whisky to drown his sorrow and to get off to sleep. For sleep fled from him, and no sooner did he begin dozing, but he awoke with a start, thinking he had heard something. He let his beard grow too, and though he had always been very particular in his person before, he now was utterly careless of it. Gave up washing himself for a week or two at a stretch, and if there was dirt under his fingernails, let it stop there. Oh, this disorder fed a malignant pleasure in him, for by now he had come to hate his fellow men and was embittered against all human decencies and decorum. For strange to tell, he never once in these months regretted his dear wife whom he had so much loved. No, all that he grieved for now was his departed vixen. He was haunted all this time not by the memory of a sweet and gentle woman, but by the recollection of an animal, a beast. It is true that could sit at table and play piquet when it would, but for all that nothing really but a wild beast. His one hope now was the recovery of this beast, and of this he dreamed continually. Likewise, both waking and sleeping, he was visited by visions of her. Her mask, her full white tagged brush, white throat, and the thick fur in her ears all haunted him. Every one of her foxy ways was now so absolutely precious to him that I believe that if he had known for a certain she was dead and had thoughts of marrying a second time, he would never have been happy with a woman. No, indeed. He would have been more tempted to get himself a tame fox, and would have counted that as good a marriage as he could make. Yet this all proceeded, one may say, from a passion, and a true conjugal fidelity, that it would be hard to find matched in this world. And though we may think him a fool, almost a madman, we must, when we look closer, find much to respect in his extraordinary devotion. How different indeed was he from those who, if their wives go mad, shut them in madhouse and give themselves up to concubinage. And nay, what is more, there are many who extenuate such conduct too. But Mr. Tebrick was of a very different temper, and though his wife was now nothing but a haunted beast, cared for no one in the world but her. But this devouring love ate into him like a consumption, so that by sleepless nights and not caring for his person, in a few months he was worn to the shadow of himself. His cheeks were sunken, his eyes hollow but excessively brilliant, and his whole body had lost flesh, so that looking at him the wonder was that he was still alive. Now that the hunting season was over, he had less anxiety for her. Yet even so he was not positive that the hounds had not got her, for between the time of his setting her free and the end of the hunting season, just after Easter, there were but three vixen killed near. One of those three one was a half-blind or wall-eyed, and one was a very grey, dull-coloured beast. The third answered more to the description of his wife, but that it had not much black on the legs, whereas in her the blackness of the legs was very plain to be noticed. But yet his fear made him think that perhaps she had got mired in running, and the legs being muddy were not remarked on as black. One morning, the first week in May, about 4 o'clock, when he was out waiting in the little copse, he sat down for a while on a tree stump. and when he looked up saw a fox coming towards him over the ploughed field. It was carrying a hare over its shoulder, so that it was nearly all hidden from him. At last, when it was not 20 yards from him, it crossed over, going into the copse, when Mr. Trubrick stood up and cried out, "Sylvia! Sylvia, is it you?" The fox dropped the hair out of his mouth and stood looking at him. And then our gentleman saw at the first glance that this was not his wife, for whereas Mrs. Trubrick had been of a very bright red, this was a swarthier, duller beast altogether. Moreover, it was a good deal larger and higher at the shoulder, and had a great white tag to his brush. But the fox, after the first instant, did not stand for his portrait, you may be sure, but picked up his hair and made off like an arrow. Then Mr. Trubrick cried out to himself, "Indeed, I am crazy now. My affliction has made me lose what little reason I ever had. Here am I taking every fox I see to be my wife. My neighbors call me a madman, and now I see that they are right. Look at me now. Oh God, how foul a creature I am. I hate my fellows. I am thin and vested by this consuming passion. My reason is gone, and I feed myself on dreams. Recall me to my duty. Bring me back to decency. Let me not become a beast likewise, but restore me and forgive me, O my Lord." With that he burst into scalding tears, and knelt down and prayed, a thing he had not done for many weeks. When he rose up, he walked back feeling giddy and exceedingly weak, but with a contrite heart, and then washed himself thoroughly and changed his clothes. But his weakness increasing, he lay down for the rest of the day, but read in the book of Job and was much comforted. For several days after this he lived very soberly, for his weakness continued, but every day he read in the Bible, and prayed earnestly, so that his resolution was so much strengthened that he determined to overcome his folly or his passion, if he could, and at any rate to live the rest of his life very religiously. So strong was this desire in him to amend his ways that he considered if he should not go to spread the gospel abroad for the Bible Society, and so spend the rest of his days. Indeed, he began a letter to his wife's uncle, the canon, and he was writing this when he was startled by hearing a fox bark. Yet so great was this new turn he had taken that he did not rush out at once, as he would have done before, but stayed where he was and finished his letter. Afterwards, he said to himself that it was only a wild fox, and sent by the devil to mock him, and that madness lay that way if he should listen. But on the other hand, he could not deny to himself that it might have been his wife, and that he ought to welcome this prodigal. Thus he was torn between these two thoughts, neither of which he completely believed. He stayed thus tormented with doubts and fears all night. The next morning he woke suddenly with a start, and on the instant heard a fox bark once more. At that he pulled on his clothes and ran out as fast as he could to the garden gate. The sun was not yet high, the dew thick everywhere, and for a minute or two everything was very silent. He looked about him eagerly but could see no fox, yet there was already joy in his heart. Then while he looked up and down the road, he saw his vixen step out of the copse, but 30 yards away. He called to her at once, "My dearest wife! Oh, Sylvia! You are come back!" And at the sound of his voice he saw her wag her tail, which set his last doubts at rest. But then, though he called her again, she stepped into the copse once more, though she looked back at him over her shoulder as she went. At this he ran after her, but softly and not too fast lest he should frighten her away, and then looked about for her again and called to her when he saw her among the trees, still keeping her distance from him. He followed her then, and as he approached she retreated from him, yet always looking back at him several times. He followed after her through the underwood up the side of the hill, when suddenly she disappeared from his sight behind some bracken. When he got there he could see her nowhere, but looking about him found a fox's earth, but so well hidden that he might have passed it by 1,000 times, and would never have found it unless he had made particular search at the spot. But now, though he went on his hand and knees, he could see nothing of his vixen, so that he waited a little while, wondering. Presently he heard a noise of something moving in the earth, and so waited silently, then saw something which pushed itself into sight. It was a small sooty black beast like a puppy. There came another behind it, then another, and so on till there were 5 of them. Lastly there came his vixen pushing her litter before her, and while he looked at her silently, a prey to his confused and unhappy emotions, he saw that her eyes were shining with pride and happiness. She picked up one of her youngsters then in her mouth, and brought it to him, and laid it in front of him, and then looked up at him very excited, or so it seemed. Mr. Trubrick took the cub in his hands, stroked it, and put it against his cheek. It was a little fellow with a smutty face and paws, with staring vacant eyes of brilliant electric blue, and little tail like a carrot. When he was put down, he took a step toward his mother, and then sat down very comically. Mr. Trubrick looked at his wife again and spoke to her, calling her a good creature. Already he was resigned, and now, indeed, for the first time, he thoroughly understood what had happened to her, and how far apart they were now. But looking first at one cub, then at another, and having them sprawling over his lap, he forgot himself, only watching the pretty scenes, and taking pleasure in it. Now and then he would stroke his vixen and kiss her, liberties which she freely allowed him. He marvelled more than ever now at her beauty, for her gentleness with the cubs and the extreme delight she took in them seemed to him then to make her more lovely than before. Thus lying amongst them at the mouth of the earth, he idled away the whole of the morning. First he would play with one, then with another, rolling them over and tickling them, but they were too young yet to lend themselves to any other more active sport than this. Every now and then he would stroke his vixen, or look at her, and thus the time slipped away quite fast, and he was surprised when she gathered her cubs together and pushed them before her into the earth, then coming back to him once or twice very humanly bid him good-bye, and that she hoped she would see him soon again, now he had found out the way. So admirably did she express her meaning that it would have been superfluous for her to have spoken, had she been able, and Mr. Trubrick, who was used to her, got up at once and went home. But now that he was alone, all the feelings which he had not troubled himself with when he was with her, but had, as it were, put aside till after his innocent pleasure were over, all these came swarming back to assail him in 100 tormenting ways. Firstly, he asked himself, was not his wife unfaithful to him? Had she not prostituted herself to a beast? Could he still love her after that? But this did not trouble him so much as it might have done, for now he was convinced inwardly that she could no longer in fairness be judged as woman, but as a fox only. And as a fox she had done no more than other foxes. Indeed, in having cubs and tending them with love, she had done well. Whether in this conclusion Mr. Trubrick was in right or not is not for us here to consider. But I would only say to those who would censure him for a too lenient view of the religious side of the matter, that we have not seen the thing as he did, and perhaps if it were displayed before our eyes, we might be led to the same conclusion.